Hello, I'm Tamara Banks, and welcome to Denver Decides. This community partnership is dedicated to accessible and transparent elections. The partnership includes the League of Women's Voters of Denver, Interneighborhood Cooperation, and is presented by Denver 8 TV. Our goal today is to present a candidate forum as we gear up for the election on Tuesday, November 7th. Among other offices, this election includes the candidates hoping to become a member of the Denver Public School Board. This forum is for those seeking the at-large position on the board. The at-large position represents all of the city's school district. Our format is a pretty standard one. The candidates will have timed opening and closing statements. That will be followed by rounds of questions that will have been submitted by the organizers of this forum, as well as DPS students who are members of the Mayor's Youth Commission. All candidates will answer all questions, and all of their responses will be timed. Our timers are out front where the candidates can see them. So let's begin by meeting the candidates vying for the one of two at-large positions on the Denver Public Schools Board of Directors. A reminder to our studio audience, please hold your applause until all candidates have been introduced. The candidates are standing left to right, facing the audience in the order that their names will appear on the ballot in November. So beginning at my immediate left is Julie Bañuelos. To her left is Robert Speth. And on his left is Barbara O'Brien. Let's welcome our candidates to the forum today. And one more note to the candidates. On behalf of the forum organizers, the audience here tonight, and our viewers at home, we sincerely urge you to be honest, direct, and forthright to help the voters distinguish one candidate from another. We'll begin with a 1-minute opening statement from each candidate. We will proceed in the ballot order with these statements. So once again, starting at my immediate left is Julie. We'll begin with you with 1 minute for opening statement.
Hello, I'm Julie Bañuelos. I spent 15 years in Denver's classrooms as a teacher, union leader, and community advocate. I am running for the Denver Public School Board at large because it's about time that we have a public school teacher's perspective on the board. Like many of our students, I come from a working class background. I come from a working class background where a quality and comprehensive public education is a necessary asset. Today's public schools in Denver are far from being assets for our students. The current system assumes that everybody has an equal access to transportation and wish to traverse their children across town to drop them off at school. The current system is destroying communities by stacking the odds against them. Worse, the current system is manufacturing segregation. The current board talks about teacher retention, but is disenfranchising teachers who make great sacrifices.
Thank you. Now, Robert.
Great, thank you. And just a big thank you to everybody for joining us on this beautiful fall evening to talk about public education in the city of Denver. By way of introduction, my name is Robert Speth. I'm running for the Denver Public School Board position at large here in the city of Denver, so everyone residing in Denver will have the opportunity to vote for me. I would say first and foremost, I'm a parent and not a politician. I have two children that are currently attending Denver Public Schools. One of them is at Lake Middle School, and the other is at Escuela Valdez, which is a elementary school in Northwest Denver. I would say that experience drives most of my thoughts when it comes to how I would handle myself on the board. And I would also say this, that I am a strong, strong believer of public education. I'm a proud product of public education. And honestly, I would be honored to serve you as your representative on the Denver Public School Board. Thank you.
Thank you. And Barbara?
Thank you, and thank you to everyone, and it's great to be here. We had a wonderful forum with students last night, and I can't wait to hear more questions because we learned the most from having to talk and listen to students, and I appreciate that. When I was growing up, my mom was really quite sick for a very long time, and I learned to read on my grandmother's lap. And in my teenage years, spent a lot of time sitting with my mom reading novels to pass the time. And I have been on a mission to make sure that kids in Denver and all of Colorado have the ability to learn to read and develop a passion for learning the way I feel that, in a way, saved my life. Maybe not really, but in terms of my imagination and my ability to feel like I could handle anything that comes along. And when I serve now on the school board as the current at-large member, I think about what it means that we have kids that are behind, we have kids that are catching up in
Thank you.
reading, and we need to keep pushing.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So now we get to begin our questions, and we'll start in reverse order of the ballot. So, Barbara, you will answer first. What do you believe is the biggest issue DPS is facing? And you
It's
have
the
1 minute.
biggest issue facing DPS, I think, is the pressure that housing and development is putting on our families. I've heard from so many parents that they are struggling to stay in their homes and for their kids to be able to go to their schools. Last year, we had in the vicinity of 25,000 students, nearly a quarter of DPS students, have to change schools because their parents couldn't afford to stay in the housing that they had. So I think the turmoil this is creating, the lack of continuity in a classroom, the disruption to a family is putting a pressure on our families that we have to work with the city to figure out, and we've got to figure out how the schools can play a role in adding safety and security to the lives of kids who are experiencing this disruption.
Thank you. Robert, we'll turn to you.
Sure. For me, this is a simple one. I think really the biggest challenge I see facing the district right now is that we have a district leadership team that is very, very focused on privatizing education in the state of Colorado, or in the city of Denver. And the reality of the situation is that currently we have 60 out of our 200 schools that have been privatized at this point in time. And just this year, we had another 14 schools that were approved for outsourcing by a vote by our current board of 7-0. It was a 7-0 vote on that. And so when I look at what I see from a parent's view and a student's view is, in a community view, is that I'm not seeing these communities genuinely asking for and striving to have these schools closed and then ultimately privatized. What I see is time and time again, our communities asking for help. They're asking for us to stop closing schools and start helping them, and that is what will be a founding focus for me on the school board. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And Julie?
You got it. I would say and you said it was what's the worst thing about our district right now, right? Or what's
Biggest
the worst problem? I would say that instead of congregating our communities, we are segregating our communities through the choice system. Right now we are creating manufactured segregation at alarming rates, and everyone should be concerned about that. It is so important for us to have diverse communities in our strong neighborhood communities. So for me, I find that this system is really making us all vulnerable, and we should all be concerned about that.
Okay. All right. The next round of questions. And Julie, we'll be starting with you. This time the question is, what would you do about creating greater efficiency and transparency in the DPS budget?
Great question. I think that one of the most important things in creating efficiency and transparency is to let our taxpayers, our families, and our students who can process this information, let them know what the values are when it comes to expenditures. We need to be able to treat the money that we receive in a way where we see it as valuable and as assets to those schools, because right now we don't get to see how much money is spent at the central office instead of going directly to our schools that most need it.
Thank you. And Barbara, we'll jump over to you.
We've taken big steps to be more transparent and try and get the financial information that the public deserves in a more accessible form. So we now have a budget for every school up on their website, as well as the DPS general website. We supported the legislation that went through that required reporting of funds, and actually have pushed for requiring more districts to be as transparent as DPS is, knowing that DPS still has a long way to go. And we have also been pushing money from the central office out to the schools. So the central office is now down to 4% of the budget for DPS, which is, people know, is a very small overhead. It's gone out to the schools so they can do the work they need to do.
Okay, thank you. And Robert.
Sure. No, I think it's a wonderful question. When we look at the DPS infrastructure from the outside looking in, right, as parents, having our children attend schools and working with the educational teams at those schools, we find that many times, and I literally just had this happen today, where my wife came home and said, "What is going on here? I'm struggling to make sense of this and how this money is being allocated compared to where we were the previous year." And it's extremely frustrating to parents and community members when things like that happen. I think another thing that we can, really focus on is a true external audit of the DPS budget. That is something that would no doubt shed a lot of light on a lot of expenditures that are going out to private corporations for a variety of services, and we have a lot of consultative services that DPS invests in. And frankly, I think those are monies that could be better spent going directly into our schools and into our classrooms.
Okay, thank you. So for this next round of questions, we have a special guest joining us, a member from the Mayor's Youth Commission. Please welcome Jarrell Bow.
Hi, my name is Jadai. I'm an 11th grader at the Denver School of Science and Technology at Cole. So my question is, how do you plan to include student voice while making decisions on the board?
Robert, we'll start with you.
Okay, yeah, great. So great question, right? And again, I think that ties back into the last question and to a certain degree, right? Where we have communities, whether they be parents or whether they be students, that are feeling that their voices may be being heard, but they're not being truly listened to, right? And, full disclosure, that's a challenge for any large district, but there's no doubt that DPS as a whole could do better about community engagement and involving our students directly in that process. And so, when we look at, as candidates, what could we do better if we had that chance, right? I think number one thing for me is rotating the board meeting out into the community and getting directly into potentially your school, right? Or certainly a school near you, right? Where it would be easier for you to come and speak directly to board members. And this has been tried a few times, but I do think this is something that if I were elected to the board, I would really make a very concerted effort to reach out to folks in the community more directly and get those board meetings more accessible to you.
Great. Thank you, Jade. For me, it is so important at this point to really listen to the voice of our students. I think at last night's student forum, it was a student-led forum, it gave us an idea of how essential your voice is and how much you are a stakeholder. You are our future. We have to be able to have this pipe. And I say pipe because there's the wrong pipe, but we need to create a communication pipe where you feel heard and where I come to you as a board member. You have student boards of education. You have groups like y'all and Yaz, right? And Padres and Jóvenes Unidos. I think that they need to be part of the people that we visit as well for, I don't know how often you meet, but it certainly needs to be part of the schedule that I have to be able to make sure I have a pulse of your desires and whether policy is working.
Thank you for your question, and thank you for continuing to push it, because as Robert said, it's sometimes not easy to get adults to be as flexible as they need to be. The board did make a real effort to be out in the community and in fact had school board meetings in schools every other month for a year, and we actually heard from the schools that that created so much extra work for them that they asked us to please figure something else out. So I am so open to any ideas you have where we can do a better job of getting community and student voice. I am open to listening. I also make a point of going to schools everywhere, and I have unstructured time. It's not for meetings. I like to go to the cafeteria and sit down and listen. I like to walk through the halls and see how kids are chatting with each other and introduce myself and take questions. So even though the board has had trouble figuring out the best way to do this, I've taken on the responsibility myself to go to where students are and to listen and to take what I hear back to my colleagues.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you, Ms. Jade. Well done. Our next round of questions for the candidates. Barbara, we'll start with you for this answer first. What actions within the purview of the school board authority should be taken to increase racial and economic integration and reduce racial isolation?
This is a top priority that we are working on, and starting with the report from Dr. Sharon Bailey on the experience of African American educators and students in the district, the formation of a committee of more than 100 African American community leaders to write recommendations for the district on how they could be better, and then a similar Latino roundtable to get a different perspective. So we are very open to listening to other ideas than the district has been able to generate itself. I personally helped change the boundaries for some schools so that kids from Quig Newton could go to a very good middle school instead of being sent to a middle school near their housing project that wasn't that great. So we are working with what we have control over: boundaries, input, reports, recommendations, and I think we're going to actually turn the corner because of the community involvement we've had.
Thank you. Robert?
This is just a super question, right? And this is one that any parent living in the city of Denver knows. This is becoming more and more prominent. And the reality is that segregation levels in the city of Denver from a public school system are actually at near historic highs. We're actually at levels that were last seen before we began busing in the city so long ago. And for many of us, that is just truly heartbreaking because we want to think that we're living in a society that has moved past that, right? But the reality is, staring us right in the face, right in our school system, we're seeing this problem. I would point to Northwest Denver and actually many other schools around town, but I'll cite North High School as an example. This is a school that the community just started to say, look, we're all going to go here. We're stronger together, and we all want all of our children to go here, regardless of background, et cetera, et cetera. And they're operating now at an 80% children of color ratio, and it's having a profound effect and a wait list for students at this time.
All right. Thank you. Julie?
For me, the first thing that needs to happen is that the district needs to admit that we have this problem of segregation. Clearly, I have that as part of my platform or as the way I started this conversation. And so there are a couple of things that we need to address. One is choice. Choice benefits a few and hurts the most. Second, we need to have a culturally responsive curriculum, not just for our students, but for the adults that are dealing with our kids on the day-to-day and with our board members. We need to have those courageous conversations in order to really know who are our true allies so that we can push forward and really transcend the prejudices, the segregation that is taking place here in DPS. So for me, it is so important, especially during this time where we all are impacted by the greater stage, where we see blatant discrimination on Facebook Live and all over social media.
All right. Thank you. Okay, another question, and Julie, you'll be the first one to answer this time around. What things should be considered in the decision to close schools, and when should it be decided and announced?
There should never be a decision to close a school. That is so demoralizing to our students, to our teachers, to our communities that trust in these centers that are beacons for a lot of families. I went to my school that was across the street. I grew up in public housing. I transcended that experience and used the assets that I had to be able to appreciate not only that whole experience, but we also need, and without one thing that needs to really be taken into account, and that our parents and our students and everybody that are stakeholders, they need to know that that school performance framework is very flimsy. It has a lot of vulnerabilities that are hurting our kids. And we need to consider that as educators and as people who involve ourselves in the lives of kids as policymakers.
Thank you. Robert?
Sure. This one is definitely near and dear to me. We just recently had a round of closures this year in DPS, and I was at that board meeting when that decision was made, and it was a 7-0 vote on that to close these schools, and that was tough. And I've been in the situation, and am currently working, with a school that, we're really trying to get the neighborhood and the community support and move forward together on, right? I would agree that when we look at school closure, it has to be an act of absolute last resort. I love the fact that the new superintendent in Jefferson County came in, and within a week, first thing he said was moratorium on school closure for 2 years. And certainly as an incoming board member, I would love to institute a policy like that because honestly, we need to stop closing schools. We need to start helping schools, and we need to start coming together as communities around these neighborhood schools and make them great. We can do it.
Thank you. And Barbara?
I agree that closing a school should be an action of last resort. All of the schools that we've had to deal with that have been in that category have received millions of extra dollars, more teachers, intervention specialists, parent meetings, different principals. And what I have struggled with is I believe in my heart that my ultimate responsibility is to the children of this community. And at what point do you say nothing is working to make a school better, and a child has one chance to get a good public education? And so when do you decide that it's time to act on behalf of that child, knowing, having talked to parents, it's disruptive, it's hard on a community, there's no question it's a traumatic experience. But that balance between when do you act on behalf of the kids and when do you give a school another couple years to try is a hard decision, and any board member has to be willing to make it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, candidates. We're going to mix it up a little bit. We're going to do what's called a lightning round. Your answers will not be timed, but you can only answer yes or no. No explanation, no deep dive, and you can also pass. All right? And we're going to go ballot order each time. All right. Starting with Julie. Should school board meetings be held out in the district versus downtown at the administration building?
Yes.
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 There are currently 44 high schools in DPS. Is that a good number?
No.
No.
Depends.
Yes or no, or pass? Should all students, parents, or guardians be required to know the names and contact information for school board members?
No.
No.
Could you say that again,
Of course.
please?
Should all students, parents, or guardians be required to know the names and contact information for all school board members?
Yes.
Should funding for the arts be increased in all schools?
Yes.
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 According to teachers and students, cell phones are a distraction in many classrooms. Should DPS create a district cell phone policy to lessen the impact?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Should DPS accept large-scale advertising on school buses as a source of revenue?
No.
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 Do you think the influence of social media and technology might be making students more inattentive in class by lowering their attention spans?
Yes.
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 Should DPS be doing more to improve nutrition for students?
Yes.
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 All right, let's give our candidates a big round of applause for that lightning round. Now it's time for the candidates to take over my job just a little bit. This is the one-on-one portion of the program. Each candidate will select one other candidate and ask a question of that candidate. Each candidate will have this opportunity. And candidates, if you are chosen, you will have 1 minute to respond. We'll begin in ballot order, and that means Julie, you get to select one candidate.
Okay. I select Barbara O'Brien. The DPS board and superintendent must address their failure in providing services to our English learners and stop using these students as scapegoats to close or restart schools. Our working families and our Black students are negatively impacted by the district's failure to follow the consent decree. Can you explain what the consent decree is and the steps that you've taken to avoid exposure from the federal court?
Does having to explain the consent decree count against my time?
No.
Thank you. Would you like to explain it, Julie?
Wait, what?
The question she asked, does she have time to explain what the dissent?
It's just
So,
she
yep.
could limit it to 3 points, and it could be answered because this is important. Let's leave it to explain the consent decree for us.
Yes.
Yes. So DPS was not educating kids who were English language learners, had a home language that was different, and truly was not doing what it should do to educate all kids. It was sued in court. It defended itself. This is way before I ever got there, and lost, and has been under a consent decree requiring it to take a number of actions to help English language learning students get caught up.
Okay.
So that's
Now-
the consent decree.
Okay. Now you can start the clock for the answer.
I've met a number of times with members of the Congress of Hispanic Educators, and I think what they put into the consent decree around more professional development for all teachers around working with kids with different languages has made a huge difference in the performance of kids who are acquiring English. What I've also heard is that the emphasis on just learning English is a real burden on families because they're getting kids and parents who speak two different languages. I agree with them that a bilingual district ought to be our goal so that parents and kids can talk to each other and kids can work in school. So I personally have supported creating a bilingual district since 2013, and I'm happy to say that the fastest learners of reading in kindergarten through third grade this past year were Spanish-speaking students who took the test in Spanish to prove they had the language arts to read.
Okay. Thank you. Robert, now you get to ask one candidate a
Okay.
question.
Sure. My question will be to Barbara.
Surprise.
I know you're astounded, right? Yeah, and I'm sure you know the topic. So, over the past 5 years, our local races have come to be dominated by millions of dollars of out-of-state special interest money being routed into Colorado organizations such as by organizations such as Ed Reform Now and DFER, of which you are a sitting board advisor. Ed Reform Now, financed by New York hedge fund managers, just routed $325,000 into Raising Colorado, which is currently supporting your reelection. How do the citizens of Denver know that you're voting in their interest on the board and not those of the out-of-state billionaires that are routing all this money into our elections?
And you get 1 minute.
I'm so disappointed. I thought you would at least be original.
Nope.
I've heard that before.
It's the coming right at you.
All I can control is my own campaign. We all have money coming into us that we don't know about or haven't asked about. You have money coming to you from the union. Somehow that's not considered a special interest. What I know is that I believe in local control of public schools, that principals should have the authority with the school community to do the hiring of educators that will be in the school, and that we all as adults should be accountable for kids learning. So if there are people out there who share those values and they want to support me in my campaign, I'm going to take it just like you do and just like you do, because I'm fighting for values that I believe in. And I'll support campaign finance reform. I think the money flowing around is awful. I've supported every bill, as you have, to make school board funding transparent. But at the moment, what I can control is what I believe in and how I communicate that.
Thank you. Okay, now Barbara, your turn to ask one question.
So this is for Julie, and it's not in any way a gotcha question. This is, you and I disagree on testing, and you very much think that it is harmful to students, but we both want to close the achievement gap for kids. And I guess I want to know how you think we would close the achievement gap if we're not finding some way to measure if kids are getting better or going backward, and how you would reconcile those two things.
Barbara, thank you. That's not a gotcha question. That's an
No.
educator question. So I appreciate that you're giving me that opportunity. So I like to call it the opportunity gap, where we are creating a barrier for all our kids to access the curriculum in an efficient, in a manner that's accessible to them. So as a Montessorian, I believe that we must trust the learning process, but first we must take our students into mind. One student is not the same as another, so we need to start thinking about portfolios and having them master things that they choose to learn, because our children, our students have multi skills, and they rely on different assets that they have, whether it's kinesthetic or a different sort of model of learning, that we need to be able to support them so that they feel that they're reaching their potential, but that we also trust the teachers that they know their students to be able to do this.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, candidates. Now I get to ask one last question. And we will start with Barbara. You get to be the first to answer, then Julie, then Robert. The question is, given that people have a preference on which schools to attend, how will you make sure you are honoring that choice and making sure that all schools across the district are performing at a high level?
We have a blind enrollment process so that any parent has an equal chance to get their child into the school that they want. It doesn't matter if you sign up early or sign up late. We also save seats in schools, so if there are mid-year transfers, there are those 25,000 kids last year who moved around because of housing problems. So we are making the process as open and as fair as we can. Now, the part about how do we make sure the schools are a high-quality choice, we have work to do on that. But we are improving for the elementary schools the literacy of kids. We are offering high schools apprenticeships and career paths so they can make the transition to work from high school in any way they want to go, college or career. We're coming at this from a lot of directions, and we're seeing progress. Every group of students improved on every subject area last year.
All right. Thank you. And Julie?
Sure. So, first of all, I would like to say that I really do honor the parents' choice right now, but I also would like to point out that this system is highly competitive. And in a competition, there will always be winners and there will always be losers. And the majority of those DPS students that are not benefiting from this choice system are left with feeling like they have their last resort. But also, they may not want their last resort. They may just want their neighborhood schools. So for me, we need to consider being able to provide neighborhood schools that are fully funded, that are comprehensive, that offer arts, music, instead of focusing on testing. So when we talk about achievement and how we base what is a quality school, we really need to reevaluate these metrics, because our schools are not just a color. They're not just red, yellow, orange, green, blue. They're more than that.
Right. Thank you. And Robert?
Sure. I mean, this is a really important question, so I appreciate you bringing this up. Literally today, right, was the day that the DPS released their color coding scheme for every school in the city. And to Julie's point, every school was reduced to a color. And a lot of parents look only at that color. And if those parents have means and that color that school over there might be, maybe it's red, they might say, I'm just not going to go there, right? I'm going to go a different direction, right? And what ends up happening is then that school continues to drift possibly sideways and maybe have a hard time moving out past that color designation. And the reality is a lot of these schools, even though they're labeled a particular color, are tremendous schools. When you go in and meet that principal and when you go in and meet the teaching staff, they're doing tremendous work. And students are getting tremendous results out of there. So, I think we definitely still have a universe of choice, but I think we do need to take a hard look at reducing a school to a single color.
Okay. All right, candidates, that's the end of our Q&A segment. We move on now to the closing statements. And you will each get a minute and a half for a closing statement. And we'll reverse the order of the opening statements, which means we'll begin with Barbara. And you'll get 90 seconds for your closing statement.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for coming. This is what democracy is all about. Thank you. So I learned to read on my grandmother's lap. Fast forward, I was the speechwriter and education advisor for Governor Richard Lamb, and he came to me and said one day, I want to give a major speech on education. Can you go find out what's going on? And when I saw where Colorado really was, the shock that he and I felt about the gaps that already existed, about how people moving into Colorado were coming in with much better educations than homegrown kids were getting here. You can imagine, and for my love of reading and love of education, to think that our state couldn't even educate our kids as well as kids coming from other places, I just became on a personal mission to make sure that kids had a chance to develop a passion for learning and to apply that to all the opportunities our state makes. I ran the Colorado Children's Campaign. I was lieutenant governor. The most important thing I've ever done has been on the school board, and I want a chance to have your support to keep pushing for another 4 years. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Robert, 90 seconds.
Great. Yeah, a big shout out to everybody here and everybody watching, taking the time to, talk about education issues here in Denver. Again, my name is Robert Speth. I'm running for school board at large. The reality is we have a district and a board that is very focused on privatizing education in the city of Denver. And, candidly, again, we have 60 schools that have been privatized so far out of 200, another 14 approved. We've been on this mission as a district now for about 12 years, and candidly, the results just aren't there to support it. When we look at our reading proficiency rates for our students, they're currently at 39%, and that's not a great number. And if you look back in time 12 years ago, it was 39% 12 years ago. So clearly something's not engaging here. When we look at graduation rates, Denver Public Schools rates in the bottom 10% of major metros across the United States, and that deeply bothers me. I mean, we're behind cities like Detroit, Baltimore, and Newark. So something's not working, and the reality of it is that we have children that are in this district today that are being hurt by the policies that are being decided on by our board and our superintendent. So the fact of the matter is, I would love to serve you, listen to the community, serve the citizens of Denver, and be your representative on the school board citywide for the city of Denver, and make some changes around here and get us back on track and moving forward into this next century. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. And now Julie.
Sure. Because of my experience, especially as a teacher, one that reflects the majority of the students that attend DPS, and the only candidate that knows the trauma related to living with all of life's necessities, I'm the only one that knows what it feels like when the cards are stacked against you. I'm the only one that knows what's in our classroom, what is happening in our classroom, and who goes to our classrooms. Right now, the current policy is so far removed from the reality with our children. I am not a politician. I am an educator with first-hand experience in our classrooms. And more importantly, I know what is working and what is not. I know all our students will succeed in the district if they are given proper supports for the highest needs, and especially those schools that are not experiencing the district's responsibilities in adhering to the federal court consent decree. Excuse me. Our students are English language learners. Our Black students are the ones that are losing out as a result of this system. We don't need any more career politicians. We don't need any more people who have no clue what's going on in our classrooms. I'm the only one in this race that knows what's going on in the classrooms. The time is now, not the next election, to change the direction of DPS so that every student thrives.
All right. Thank you. Good job, candidates. And now it's the audience's turn to show their appreciation for the candidates for their hard work. Let's give them a big round of applause. Nice job. And we want to thank and acknowledge students from the Mayor's Youth Commission who submitted questions for this candidates forum. Jeray Jalot, thank you so much, who participated in this forum. And our thanks also to the Denver Decides partners, which include Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation and the League of Women Voters of Denver. Denver Decides is presented by Denver 8 TV. Remember, the election is Tuesday, November 7th. Let your voice be heard. Be sure you are registered to vote and make sure you go out and vote. For complete election information online, go to denverdecides.org. I'm Tamara Banks. Thanks for joining us.